Okay, hey y'all, it's Mace here. Most of you probably know me, but if you don't, I'm Mace. I've been with Rebel from the start, and I love you all so much, and it's just really sweet to be with you all. Tiny facts about me: I'm en route to becoming a therapist, which I'm pretty excited about. I'm zooming from in the closet, but I'm out of the closet. Um, that's a good joke I just came up with. I'm proud of that. I'm really excited to talk with you guys tonight. I'm going to talk about this concept called relationship anarchy, and I'm pumped about it. And I hope that this can be a safe and good conversation for you. Before I say that, Scott said this at the top of tonight's call, and I just want to address, like, we're doing this sex and relationship series, and in many ways, I know we failed you in the first 3 weeks of this series in many regards. There was blatant misgendering in the talks. We had someone who was a cis straight person come in and talk to a group of queer youth. There was harm done in many ways. There was gender essentialism, it centered whiteness. And I just want to name that impact in this space and apologize on behalf of all of our leadership team and just say that we want to do right by you and make sure you guys can feel comfy, and also give you space to know that you can trust your intuition. For some of us, the talks were great and it was new information that was really helpful. And for other folks, they felt in their bodies or in their stories that this was impacting them and giving them harm. And I just want to name, like, your intuition and your pushback and want to honor here. And we hear you and want to open the invitation for, if you have any more thoughts you want to give or things to share, all the channels are open for leaders of what you want this series to be. We have like 6 weeks left of this series. So tonight I'll be talking about something that hopefully is inspiring and playful and kind of feels cozy and comfy for us. But we have many places we can go with this series. So if you have ideas or things you really hope to see, use your voice. We welcome that. Reach out to leaders, reach out to us. We want to hear complaints, concerns, ideas, whatever. So I just want to get that to get us started. I'm going to share my screen. Scott, do I have the ability? I do. I do have the ability.
It's a special secret power.
Okay. So like I said, I'll just also say this other tidbits about me. Like, in terms of my values as a person, I highly value playfulness and curiosity. And so I just hope that that's the way I'm orienting myself towards this topic tonight. And I invite and encourage that for you. I'm going to be introducing what I would say is like a model for relationship. And I want to just also say at the gate, like, this is not like, this is what you should do or what you should be or how you should relate. This is like a prompt for inspiration and creativity is how I would describe what I'm going to explain. And this idea of relationship anarchy, which I'll describe in a second, I wanted to share about this because it honestly matters a lot to me and comes from my heart and my own story. I would consider myself someone who and decides on a case-by-case basis what they want each relationship to look like. So if you were to take and break down the words relationship and anarchist, it is essentially a model of relationship that is wanting to break down hierarchies and break down expectations for the modes of which we're supposed to relate. And this, I believe, is a very queer model, and that it is aggressively kind of looking at the heteronormative view of monogamy and relationships that are supposed to look a certain way and saying, you know what, there's so many more ways to relate to people and we can do this in different ways. I'm going to take a quick detour and just talk a little bit about like my own personal image that I carry with me of God. This is and how I think it relates to relationship anarchy. I am someone who, this image right here, this painting, I actually painted myself. And this image of God as Trinity, so you could call it God the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. You could call it Creator, Sustainer, Redeemer. I think those are some words people use. There's many different words folks use for this relationship of three that is God. And there's a lot of theology out there around like Trinitarian theology. And I actually studied theology in my undergrad and found always coming back to images of the Trinity as being just speaking to my soul. And in my spirit, this image of God as being three in one, as existing in this like very unique paradox of being constantly in relationship and also having individuality, to be really powerful to me. And there is this fancy word. I think I've actually talked about this at Rebel once before, but can't get enough of it. This fancy word called Parakarisis, which essentially means divine dance. And it is trying to name this very interesting dynamic of the relationship of God with God's self. So this idea that there are three persons of God, and these three persons are not just stagnant figures, and they aren't hierarchical. They're actually always in dynamic, flowing into one another and coming out of one another. So this theologian, Catherine Lacugna, writes a lot about this, and these are her words. She says, Parakarisis expressed the idea that the three divine persons mutually inhere in one another, draw life from one another, are what they are by relation to one another. God is ecstatic, relational, dynamic, and vital. And I just find this image to be really powerful when I think about the way I want to relate in the world. And I just think it's such a beautiful image of how God themselves is, in a way, doing relationship anarchy, is in a way non-hierarchical in the way they relate to themselves. And I think that that is an image that we then are invited into. So this painting here is what I call a Trinity of Four, because I think I like the idea of God inviting humanity into this Trinitarian dance. So a new paradox. It's 4 and 3 at the same time. So I just wanted to offer that as like a working image of God that I think also informs my own understanding of relationship anarchy. Okay, so I'll just read these other pieces. So these are other aspects of relational anarchy that I find to be really helpful and really cool ways of thinking about how to relate to other people. So relational anarchists are often highly critical of conventional cultural standards that prioritize romantic and sex-based relationships over non-sexual or non-romantic relationships. Instead, relational anarchists seek to eliminate specific distinctions between or hierarchical valuations of friendships versus love-based relationships, so that love-based relationships are no more valuable than our platonic friendships. So in other words, relational anarchy kind of blows up this idea of some relationships have more priority over others, especially in the sense of what are expected for relationships. So I think we often have this very strong narrative and culture of like the married couple or the partnered couple or the romantic couple or the sexual couple that seems to like name that there's somehow that's the way to be, and that that's where intimacy lies, and that's the ultimate end, and that's kind of where like most of the eggs are to be put. And relational anarchy kind of blows that up and says, actually, like other relationships and other ways of relating may have just as much value, and that you can determine what kinds of relationships are more valuable for you based on what your needs are, based on what your desires are, based on what your intuition is. Another important theme within relational anarchy is the resistance to placing demands or expectations on people involved in relationships that have not been agreed on by the involved parties. So a relational anarchist invites you to develop personal boundaries and expectations that you set with consent. So essentially, this is this idea that, again, with kind of often the way we have these street scripts or scripts of monogamy, which also I want to say I fully support monogamy, but there are often these scripts that there are certain expectations when you're dating someone. Oh, you should do this by this time, or because you're with this person in this way, there's these expectations. And relational anarchy is really just trying to say you actually have freedom to choose what you want in your relationship, and you kind of have the responsibility to name what you want and to work with your partners and the people in your life to name what your boundaries are with that person. What ways are we going to relate as 2 or 3 or 4 or more people? Okay, now for the fun piece that I really am excited to talk about, and it's this idea of expanding intimacy. So I think it's really interesting that I wanted to talk about this in the midst of the sex and relationship series, because I think in so many ways we are like intimacy, and it's like shortcutting for like saying sex. And I think there's actually so many other ways to think about intimacy outside of sex and sensuality, and also ways in which like sensuality is in so many pieces of our life that we don't give often credit to. So this comes from Jade Mars, and the following like slides are very inspired by Jade Mars, who is someone who did like a takeover on this one Instagram account, and I follow them and they're super cool. So suggestion to follow Jade Mars. And they talk a lot about relational anarchy. And they said, if we move away from heteronormative ideas of what constitutes an important or valid relationship, we get a chance to explore our needs, values, and desires on our own terms. We can make space for all kinds of relationships and choose who and where our love and attention goes outside of straight scripts. So in thinking of expanding intimacy, I wanted to just talk about kinds of intimacy to consider outside of the script of intimacy as being sexual. And in this sense of when we start to explore this, we may discover delights and joys that really matter to us. And in this exploration, we may find what is really important to our individual needs and desires. So here's a few kinds of intimacy to consider. This list is really short, and I imagine that you all could come up with like so many more to put on this list. And if you want to put them in the chat, you can. So kinds of intimacy to consider: intellectual, emotional, sensual, familial intimacy, cross-species intimacy, religious or spiritual intimacy, political intimacy, historical, geographical, environmental. I also just want to name, I feel like Rebel as a community in this space is in so many ways already embodying kinds of expansion of intimacy here. And I find being a part of this group to be a part of my own working in my political question marks, working in my understanding of being a relational anarchist. Okay, next slide. Okay, so then I wanted to talk about this idea of expanding intimacy beyond people-to-people intimacy, and this idea of what does it look like for us to also consider being intimate and being in relation to the more than human world. So I put some intimacies to consider. Our intimacy with animals, cuddling with pets. I have a pet snail that I consider myself to be in relation with, and watching them just crawl on my hand and feeling their slime and tending to them is a very intimate experience for me. Tactile intimacy with nature, so going out and feeling rocks and moss and letting your toes touch the ground and allowing yourself to have that sensual experience. Playing, climbing, exploring in nature. That's such an intimacy. I think play is incredibly intimate, and so to play with nature, oof. Sensual or intentional enjoyment with food and drink. So I think that's like ultimate intimacy right there. You can make a delicious meal, you take your time, you work at it, and then you go and you eat it and you enjoy it and you take it in. And I think when we can be intentional around that and be intentional on how intimate that is, I think that's a very beautiful thing. I put this on this idea of dating the weather. I don't know exactly what I mean by that, but I am like someone who's super moody about the seasons. And I just like this idea of cultivating like intimacy with fall or intimacy with winter, or spring, or whatever the weather is, being in relationship to that and imagining how that could be a part of my relational makeup. Okay. I didn't make a slide for this because I thought of this just now. Like I thought of this just a couple like minutes ago, but I also think a part for me, and relational anarchists may push back on me with this, but a part of expanding intimacy for me is also expanding intimacy with myself. So things like dating myself, taking myself on play dates, doing moments like cultivating intellectual intimacy with myself, cultivating intimacy in these ways, I find to also be an interesting thing to play with, especially thinking back to that image of God as God being existing in themselves and also separate, and just allowing relationship to form inside yourself. So I hope that this was just a prompt for you all to consider just the expansiveness in ways that you can relate. I think the queer community has already been doing this, and I want to name that I think many of us are in so many ways pushing on boundaries of what relationships can be, and I see you all in so many ways showing up for each other in uniquely intimate and expansive ways all the time. And I personally find myself inspired by that, and I just want to name that in this group. So that's all that I have to share. I hope that this just invited you to think around this. I also want to name that this is like one model for a relationship, and each person has different needs. So you may find that you actually really do value your love or partnership relationships above friendships, and that's wonderful for you. You may find that you value your platonic friendships the most. You may find you value your pet relationship to be the most important, or none is the most important. This is really hopefully just a prompt to get you thinking around what really is your desires and your needs. Okay, so I have some questions to pose for you all to talk about in your primary groups. Here they are. Your leaders also all have these questions as well. So I think that's pretty much it. I didn't want to like bomb you with too much information.
Can you touch on political intimacy? I think Madison was asking.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think that is really just in many ways this idea of like finding intimacy with folks who share a similar political party with you, or conjoining like with those matters. So that's something that I think is very much a heart matter. So I can think example, like I have a housemate who I think would actually probably put political intimacy as like a top thing for them, that they find intimacy to be when they are joining with that cause and working towards policy and change and in mutual aid and those values for them. That's a very intimate thing for them, and they share with people. And that, like, if that makes sense as an example.
I'll just say too, to expand on that, like my son Jack went door knocking with his friends for a local political candidate last week, and I think had a really significant time doing that with his friends. So I think that's very intimate, you know. So I think that's a great way to think about it.
Yeah, any other questions before we go to primary group? Be happy to.
Good point, Lizzie. Thank you, Mace.
Thank you, Mace. I feel like this is just what we needed.
I'm here for you all. This is really sweet. It's really sweet to be with you all in this way and share this little piece of me. Okay, I'm gonna stop that. Now I can see you guys all again. Whew. Didn't like not seeing you.